Let's continue.
Now, does Bernie Sanders, this is a question that we've been asking of all Democrats, does Bernie Sanders have an agenda for black people?
Absolutely.
What is it?
All right. Look, we start off, as I mentioned, with massive disparity in the general population.
Mm-hmm.
Very few have a lot. Most people have nothing. Then you got another form of disparity, which is a wealth disparity. All right? So right now, you have the white community, the average white family, owning 10 times more wealth than the average black family. You have a health disparity. Infant mortality rates in the black community, I think 2.5 times what they are in the white community. You got an education disparity. We talked about a criminal justice disparity, where African Americans are much more likely to be arrested and put in jail. Those are disparities that have got to be addressed. There is a friend of mine, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina.
Yes,
yeah. And Representative Clyburn came up with an idea, which I think we should build on. He called it 10-20-30, which says that you focus federal resources on those communities most in distress. And at the same time, you got to deal with institutional racism. I remember redlining, for example. Mm-hmm. If you're a small business person, I talked to a guy in Milwaukee last year, and he had, it seems to be a moderately successful business. I said, Bernie, I'm going, black guy, I'm going to the banks. I can't get a loan. So we got to deal with racism and discrimination within the financial services committee, within the financial services industry. You got payday lenders. My God, unbelievable. You know what the interest rate for and they're ripping off on the most vulnerable and poorest people. So to answer your question, we do have an agenda. And it's an agenda that we will fight vigorously for.
Yeah, that's why I would like to see federal, what you said about the banks, I would like to see federal government put more support into the black banks.
Absolutely.
I feel like that could help black entrepreneurs.
And not only black banks.
Homeowners as well.
Mm-hmm. And black homeowners, but black business in this sense.
Correct.
In this sense. Unemployment now is quote unquote relatively low. But you go to African American communities and the youth unemployment rate is still unbelievably high. And you tell me, please tell me, what happens if you're a kid who drops out of high school who has no money?
You're probably going to turn into a life of crime.
You got it.
Yeah.
What a waste. What a waste. So, we got to invest in those things. We'll invest in housing. A lot of people in the African American community not making a lot of money, spending 50% of their income in housing, childcare.
We got to change that. From the smallest things, from car insurance is more expensive in the African American area.
I know that.
Daycare is more expensive a lot of times in the African American area, but a lot of times we can't get loans. Like they will not give African American, black people, and minorities loans.
We met with some African American small business people in, I think, Las Vegas, Nevada.
I just had to just say what they are saying. My brother he did end up getting it. Tried to get a car, a nice one. My brother's done very well for himself as far as building up his credit, being extremely responsible when it came to building up his credit. In fact, he stayed in the military solely for the reason of continuing to build up his credit so that he could buy a home of his own that he would eventually like to pass down to his son. My brother is relatively young. He's 28 now, 27, I believe he was when he bought the car. Now, luckily things work a little bit differently for military, which worked eventually in his favor. However, when he initially went to buy the car with a credit score well over 700 and a down payment as well, that was, the dude had paid off the entirety of his loan, overpaying it, and finished it about 3.5 to 4 years, 3.5 years early. He had a check in his pocket. They didn't know about the check. The car company said, well, let's run your credit and see what we can find for you. He just wanted to see what they were going to say. One loan came back 3-4% higher. Another one 4-5% higher. Another one 3-4% higher. Not even giving him as much as he was supposed to, saying, well, if you put a little bit more of a down payment here, a little bit more of a down payment here. Now, this wasn't the first time this happened. It happened a couple of times that day, if I recall. I'm not going to say what the check was in his pocket, but let's just say he went through a military credit union and his interest was almost cut in half before he walked in. Now, upon doing more research, because my brother was kind of confused by this, I was a little bit confused by this too. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would theirs be so much different than yours? Because they don't, the military credit union sees him as a sailor or a service member. The other companies, the other loans, saw him because you have to run your credit, right? You saw him as a black man. So they based their interest off of him being black, not him being a E6 sailor who had perfect credit, paid early for a lot of things, has always paid back his credit cards on time. And do research and find out that that's exactly what it was. That this is actually an epidemic. That credit scores for black people with the same amount of income in this, and who have been as responsible with their credit and debt, they have worse credit. They qualify for less loans. Bernie Sanders talked about redlining. Those things are real problems. We're going to talk about why that's so important that he brought that up and the irony of him bringing it up in a second. But I just had to tell that little story. And that's a small story. But it's true. It's messed up, but it's so true.
And that's exactly what they were saying.
And what about HBCUs?
Absolutely.
Very big for our community.
It is
and
very
support
big.
is very big.
It is very big. They, I don't know the numbers, but as you know, a significant number of African-American teachers, academics, professionals come out of the HBCU system, and they do a great job, and they're underfunded. So when I talk about making most of the, as I recall, most of the HBCUs are public institutions. Some are not, but we are going to pay a lot of attention to them.
Now, why does it seem like this week you've been kind of dodging the reparations question? Senator Harris and Senator Warren have both kind of spoken out and said that they agree with some form of reparations.
Well, what the question is, I'm not dodging the question. The question is, what do we mean by reparations? I mean, it seems to me a lot of people mean a lot of different things. To my mind, it means that we have to deal with the fact that there is enormous disparity between the black community and the white community. And that issue has got to be addressed. And I've indicated to you some of the ways that I think it should be addressed.
Well, I think they mean some type of economic empowerment to the African descendants of slaves.
But what does that mean, economic empowerment? I just talked about the fact that I would do my best to change the banking system to make sure that we end racism, that we pay attention to distressed communities, that people get the loans they need to make the investments they need.
What about straight cash payouts?
No.
How much you want,
You
Sean?
agree with that? Why don't you agree with that?
Well, first of all, you mean just a check to every African American?
Yes.
Well, and there's a check to every Native American who were, they wiped out when the settlers first came here. I think the way we go forward is to build America together. There are distressed communities, white communities, there are distressed Latino communities. Right now, what you have is a government owned and controlled by big money interests, who worries about Wall Street and the drug companies. We're going to change that. And we're going to pay attention to the needs of working families and low-income families in this country in a way that you have never seen.
But this government has also systemically oppressed us in a way that they haven't oppressed other communities, through slavery, through segregation, now mass incarceration. And I think it should be something done specifically for African Americans.
Well, and all of those issues, all right, we are going to deal with mass incarceration. And we're going to invest. I think at the end of the day, if we end the discrimination that exists in financial services, in healthcare, in education, if we guarantee healthcare to all people, if we, and we're working on a particular program, make sure that every person in this country has a job, because there's enough work to be done dealing with climate change, dealing with our crumbling infrastructure, I would suggest to you that not only the African American community, but every community will be a hell of a lot better off than they are today.
Do you think Democrats really believe in reparations for African Americans, or is it just a good talking point for this campaign cycle?
I don't want to speak for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. we're going to end right there. Or I'm going to end the video right there because that is the part I want to focus on the most. And the rest of it's kind of like all the other talking points that you've already grown accustomed to hearing him discuss. I don't like his answer. I understand where it's coming from. I think that he believes he's being genuine. I also believe that if there was a chance for us to have reparations, there is probably nobody else other than Tulsi Gabbard who would even think to sign a legislation about reparations into power or into fruition. With that being said, I think that I don't know if you all, well, no, I know a lot of you are just not joining. In the beginning, someone said it seems that reparations have become a divisive issue. There's three reasons for that. The conditioning of American people, the same way that we were until very recently conditioned to believe that Jewish people unequivocally deserve not only reparations, but to have their apartheid state in Palestine. Until recently, that narrative was just automatic, right? It was socially constructed into the fabric of our society so that we would not debate, argue, or question what was happening in Israel, because it was obviously for military reasons. The narrative about Israel, if we do debate Israel, we don't debate whether or not they deserve reparations. Have you ever noticed that? That's why I'm always curious as to why people say reparations is divisive. We don't debate whether Jewish people deserve reparations because we've accepted the realities of the Holocaust. We don't debate even, well, how do we know that every Jewish person who goes to Israel is a descendant of a Holocaust victim? We don't ever ask that question. Because the truth of the matter is, there are a lot of people who actually benefit from the reparations of Israel because they have dual citizenship in some way, form, or fashion there. Or full citizenship in some cases. They've literally have no connection to the Jewish community or the Holocaust outside of just merely claiming that they're Jewish. But they still get the reparations. But nobody debates, once again, whether or not Jewish people deserve reparations. The debate is whether or not Israel should exist in its current form as an apartheid state, and whether or not there should be human rights violations tacked onto its leaders, which obviously there should be human rights violations. But that's a reasonable debate. Reparations, if you're like, well, should the Jewish people have been taken care of after what Germany did to them? Yeah, we think so. Germany's still paying for that. Much poorer country, by the way, the United States is. But for some reason, as with literally everything else involving Black people in this country specifically, it's always viewed as a divisive issue because of the, quite honestly and quite frankly, the racist conditioning that even Black people have been taught to believe. We've even been convinced to a certain degree. Now it is not as successful. But back in the day, well, we don't need reparations. Why do we? And I may personally not need reparations. Me personally, because of my particular situation. But that doesn't mean that I don't feel the reverberating effects of what slavery caused in the United States of America. Now, although ADOS does stand for the American Descendants of Slaves, that doesn't mean that only people who are only descendants of slaves felt the effects of slavery. If you were a Black person in this country, three or four generations ago, not even four, 3 generations ago, hell, my mother, when she was born, if she attempted to drink out of water fountain in the South, when my mom was born, I'm 30 years old, she would have been told to use the other water fountain. That's my mother, who was relatively young, just turned 50 years old. That's one generation. Generation before hers had it worse. Generation before that had it even worse. Bernie Sanders, ironically enough, discussed redlining and the impact that it had. So what he talks about is how we were held back and how it is stopping businesses from growing, which is a valid point. But what he's overlooking, which is the conversation that I think a lot of people are overlooking, once again, I'm not even going to fault him for it, because hopefully that conversation is something I can have with the campaign at some point. What he's overlooking is the fact that, yeah, black people were held back by redlining, but because of that, there were scores of white people, their white counterparts, who were jumping ahead while we were kept stagnant. That's throughout history. That's so whenever you can qualify for a mortgage, and I can't, you now have ownership of property that you can do with what you please. Like, whereas there are certain communities, especially in minority communities, where we don't own a damn thing. See, there's this idea. Once again, this is miseducation and conditioning on Bernie's part. That's why I don't like the answer. I think it's a dodge. I think that it is a divisive issue, but it's only because we've been just this. So in the same way that we've been conditioned to consider Medicare for all divisive issue until the last couple of years, is the exact same way that reparations are considered a divisive issue. And it's being even weaponized as a divisive issue by Democrats, which lets you know that they're not on our side. The establishment Democrats. But I want to say this before I talk about how the Democrats have been weaponizing reparations. And some people have been commenting on this. No offense, white people who are doing the YouTube journalism thing. You know, I like y'all. A lot of you. I like a lot of you. Leave the conversation about reparations alone, because a lot of you just simply don't. And it's not your fault. You're just discussing the conversation about reparations right now. A lot of us have been discussing this within our own communities, in our own circles, for decades, because this is just conversation. It's casual conversation. The main fallacy that I pinpoint personally when it comes to the Bernie Sanders of the world and other people who are like, well, Bernie said, or such and such said, they're going to invest in the black community. That's reparations, right? Nah, it doesn't. It's not reparations. Because how are you going to invest in the black community? What are you going to invest in the projects in the Bronx? Because we don't own that, remember? We got forced into those communities. Those are the projects. Those are federally owned buildings. So our state-owned buildings. Are you going to invest in Southside LA, where most of those houses are rented, like the Compton area and things like that, and the ones that are bought? We've seen what it looks like when the few communities where we actually have some ownership, like at least in the homes, we've seen what it looks like when the federal government invests in our communities, and we would rather just have our own money and invest in it ourselves. We've proven that we do a damn good job when we're left the hell alone. Look at Black Wall Street. Look at Wilmington, North Carolina, and the Wilmington Massacre. Look at Rosewood, Florida. Look at Chicago before the riots in 1960. Look at Berkeley, California. Look at what the Black Panthers were able to do, building its own. I mean, they built a community within themselves. So when they say we can invest in the black community, what you have to understand is, yeah, there's a black community as far as our network is concerned, but even that has been fractured to a large degree. But as far as ownership of a community, Arabs, Desi, and not East Asians, Asian Americans from because obviously Desi and Arabs are Asian as well, but like Asians from Korea, China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they were able to own businesses and stores in our neighborhoods that we were never allowed to own. Well before we could ever even think to have ownership. One thing that doesn't get discussed in the reparations discussion is gentrification. And how, if we had had equal treatment from the moment, even if we had equal treatment from the moment slavery was ended, even if it started then, no Jim Crow, no racist credit practices, no racist business loan practices, no racist, none of that stuff. Even if it was, gentrification wouldn't be taking place if we were treated evenly just from the point of the ending of slavery. But now gentrification is taking place. Why? Because redlining and all that other stuff that you talked about, but specifically redlining. Why is that? Well, because every time we've built up communities where we have some ownership as far as the businesses are concerned, and even some ownership as far as the housing market is concerned. Some, not that much, we were being held back for a long time. When we finally start to kind of catch up, just a little bit, these rich billionaire companies who help to contribute to some of the racist policies that the government leveraged against black people, they see the improvement. They realize, okay, this area is convenient and cheap because of the narrative that has been associated and the people that have been associated with this particular community. But if I buy the community, now it's convenient and expensive. And I know that these people in particular will not be able to afford to stay there, which will change the narrative, quote unquote, which will change how that community is perceived. Now, if black people had the money, those communities would be filled with other affluent black people. Their neighborhoods would already be built upon. And there are other businesses that could come in that may not be black owned, but it wouldn't matter because I already do well enough in my community. I already own businesses in my community. I'm already very well paid in my community. So you bring in another well-paying or high-class establishment, is it going to raise my property taxes? Because we're doing pretty well. That our property taxes are already pretty high. Not going to lie to you. Those are conversations. Those are conversations that don't get discussed. It's not Bernie Sanders is saying, okay, we start now. He's wrong. I'm not, like I said, it's miseducation and racist conditioning that he's been exposed to for his entire life. But it isn't just that we were held back, but conversely, a specific group of people were allowed to hyperachieve, be extremely successful off the backs of black people. And now we're even seeing our communities like in the Bronx, like in Brooklyn. Even Detroit's becoming gentrified. San Francisco got super gentrified. Oakland is becoming gentrified. Compton is becoming gentrified. Now we're seeing our communities, the little bit of ownership that we had is being taken away from us with the very same tax breaks and credits from that very same federal government that you are now saying is going to be used to invest in our community. But we don't even have ownership of most of the communities that we live in. We're living there by necessity. It's not the same thing. So, Greg, the tech guy, we need to write Nina, I hate Bernie's answers. I know, I'm already on that. I'm on that. I've already discussed it. And like I said, hopefully we'll see some improvements there. I've made it clear. I've voiced my opinion on it. And I think that Bernie is going to grow and learn on this like he grew on Venezuela, saying that, the other day he refused to say that Maduro is a dictator. That's the first time he said that. He's been coaxed into saying that he's a dictator for quite some time. So hopefully he'll grow. Hopefully as this conversation evolves, we'll see improvement there. Now, I do want to say this. Kamala and Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker were not talking about reparations. The reason that Bernie Sanders didn't want to say at the end of that conversation, is the Democratic Party just using this as a talking point? Are they serious? And he didn't want to answer that question. The reason why is because he knows Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are collectively full of shit. They are. I don't know what else to tell you. They are both full of shit. They were like, yeah, we believe in reparations. And if you read deeper into those articles, they say things like, oh, we want to invest in the black community and end systemic racism. Yeah, reparations. But what they did allowed this narrative to persist that, because they used the buzzword reparations without actually discussing what we mean by reparations. They use the buzzword of reparations because they know it's divisive. They know that they can use that to turn black supporters off of Bernie Sanders. But then they also know that once they get in the general election, they have no intentions of bringing up reparations, substantively anyway. They know that. They don't even bring up the word reparations. Why would they? They wouldn't need to. They don't have a conscience. They know Bernie Sanders does have a conscience. And even though his answers may be misguided, may be wrong, but they know he's going to answer based off his conscience and that the internet is going to react without understanding where he's coming from, without understanding what their frustrations may be based off of, and not understanding the narrative that the DNC is trying to push onto him, which is why you're even seeing this conversation about reparations asked. The conversation about reparations is being asked so persistently because they aren't going to allow it to happen. If reparations for black people were going to be a serious discussion in political debates in the House legislature and in the Senate, they would not be allowed to be discussed by the Democratic Party, nor would Kamala or Elizabeth Warren or Cory Booker ever be asked those questions. But they were asked those questions first. Then they could pivot, they could finagle, they could distract and misdirect, but still have the headline of reparations. They believe in reparations. However, when Bernie Sanders is asked, he's not going to give you a nonsensical buzzword answer. He's going to give you the answer that he feels is best based off of the situation that he feels is presented to him. And although that may not be wrong, I know he's speaking from a genuine place, and therefore I know he can be moved as I've seen him moved in the past. However, Kamala Harris and the rest are not going to move. They have no intention on doing so. And that's why they can so confidently speak on reparations as if they were going to do so, because they know, just like Hillary Clinton, the moment they get across that primary threshold into the general election, they will never bring it up again. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about those people on the left, on that left anyway. It's a divisive issue only because we've been conditioned to believe so. If people spent as much time and gave as much effort trying to figure out how reparations work, with the understanding that of course we should have reparations, it shouldn't even be a debate. They put that much effort if they put effort into trying to figure out how to make them work, as much as the effort that they put in trying to tell the world why they won't work, or trying to poke holes in the reparations argument, then reparations would have already been passed. We've been good. Like I said, I'm not speaking for me personally. I'll probably be all right without reparations. But as someone who is from the hood, as someone who has seen the real effects of racism within our financial institutions, within our government, within our history of legislative and tacit practices of racism, I don't even see how reparations are a debate, because I don't debate whether or not Native Americans deserve reparations. They absolutely deserve reparations. Some of them, depending on the state, give reparations annually or monthly. Some tribes were awarded casinos, things like that. That's a whole different conversation I want to get into. But my point is, you'll never find me debating whether or not Jewish people deserve reparations. I don't think that they should have been able to just basically displace Palestinians. at the behest of the Western military-industrial complex. That's my debate. I don't debate whether or not Jewish people deserve reparations after the Holocaust and after we actively contributed to the Holocaust. America did by allowing American corporations to basically become Nazi subsidies that ultimately built the weapons and the instruments that ended up causing so much turmoil for the Jewish community. And you'll never hear that debate out of me, because it's not a debate to have. But somehow, because of the miseducation purposely done in this country, like so many other type of vets, there's a lot of issues that we're uneducated on, that the country as a whole is uneducated on. But because of that miseducation, people believe that reparations is somehow divisive. But when do you learn? In high school, you don't learn about redlining. In high school, you don't learn about what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, or what happened in Chicago, or what's happening today with credit scores. You don't know about the Metro credit score. You don't know about that. You don't know about what happened in Rosewood, Florida, or what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Berkeley, California. You don't know about these things. You don't know about the reverberating effects of the mindset that had to be induced into the society in order for slavery to ever have been accepted to begin with. Because that's really what it's about. And so because people don't know, we're not taught the same way that Germans are taught. This is what we were responsible for. And the sins of a father make our lives 10 times harder. It's not about what's fair, what's unfair, but it's about reality. These people were disproportionately affected. Your father may have been a Nazi, but it doesn't matter who was a Nazi. Our country as a whole is responsible for this. Because our country, those who were not Jewish, tacitly or directly benefited or was not harmed during the Holocaust and shortly after. And therefore, we have a debt to pay for those who were harmed, or descendants of those who were harmed. Burn, before we go, I'll go ahead and read the super chat. Thank you very much. He says, in my honest opinion, Bernie believes that this is divisive because of all the BS the elites play, pitting us against each other over where's mine. He needs to back HR 40. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that he has a sour taste in his mouth because of that. I agree 100%. Once again, but I do think there's a level of miseducation in preconditioning. I would say it would be naive to think that there is no preconditioning based off of the social constructs that we think within as an American people. As the CIA work hard to make sure those constructs are in place. But once again, I just believe that you have to talk about the conditioning, because I know that we've all been conditioned. And so to pretend that Bernie is not subject to said conditioning, I think is just naive. But once again, because he's been conditioned into this thought process, we know he can be moved. He's not doing this for cheap votes of a particular community. He's giving his honest answer and doing what he thinks is best. And so because of that, I think that he is movable in that regard. With that being said, people, I've talked your ear off long enough. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Appreciate it. We had about 400 people watching all at once tonight. Fantastic on the live stream. Thanks for the super chats. Like I said, we have a goal of 500 patrons. Go to our Patreon link. You can donate as little as $1, as much as $100. We've had people donate both. That's perfectly fine. But any dollar amount counts, and you help the network continue to grow and evolve. And all the way that some of you have seen us grow and evolve from the moment we had 1,000 subscribers all the way up to the point where now where we have 25,000. We have a goal of 30,000 subscribers by the end of this week. I'm sure that a lot of you will help us reach that. So make sure you subscribe right now. Click that subscription button. And more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace. Thank you for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Help us reach our goal of 500 patrons. You can do so by donating as little as $1 by clicking on the Patreon link in the description below. Don't forget, join us on Roku, and JustNForm. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. And remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.